are recording. Hello, hello. Welcome to everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited to see you all here today. So it's great to meet all of you who are in here. If you can see me, I think I'm still showing up a little bit, but if you can't see me, don't worry. But if you can, just know if I look off to the side, it's so that I can monitor the chat and also so I can see where we are in the presentation. So I'm still here. I'm still focused. So just letting you know if I occasionally glance to the side. So I wanted to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us for Let's Talk Podcasting. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a second, but first I just wanted to say that I'm super glad to have all of you with us today. Now this session is going to be a little bit across the board. It's mainly focused towards beginners. I'm going to give a very wide spectrum of podcasting, just kind of from beginning to end. So we have a lot of ground to cover in an hour. If at any point, if you have questions, then please just go ahead and type them in the chat. Oh, cool. And I see Becca says, I have you pinned. So if you want to pin me, then that's totally cool as well. And if I'm looking off screen, I'm just looking at the chat. So awesomeness. So yeah, if you have any questions about anything, then feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will answer them when I see them. And also, I recognize that we may have different levels of podcasters here. Some of you may be beginning. Some of you may be here to learn more about what podcasting is. Some of you may have podcasted for years. So I would encourage you to also please feel free to share your experience in the chat. And also, right now, the very first question I'm going to ask you all is, what brought you here? Like, are you here to learn about what podcasting is? Are you already, have you already been doing this for a while and you're here to just kind of, be a lifelong learner? And, I definitely echo that sentiment. I'm always trying to learn and grow and pick up some new tips and tricks. So if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat kind of what your experience is with podcasting and what you hope to get out of this session. So with all of that being said, let me just go to the next slide. All right, so this is me. You can probably see me. So my name is Sarah Thomas, and if you are a Twitter person, then let's connect. I love to connect with fellow educators around the world. And I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area. And you see my Twitter handle there at Sarah the Teacher. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I've been teaching. I'm about to start year number 16. Wow, which is crazy because I can remember bits and pieces of day one very, very clearly, but it seems like it went by so quickly. And honestly, when I started, podcasting wasn't, I started teaching back in 2004, and I don't really remember a whole lot of talk about podcasting. I remember blogs. I do remember that around 2008 is when I got my initial exposure to podcasting through a program that my district was doing. And I started doing it a little bit with my kids, fell off. And podcasting is kind of like, there's like waves in the educational community. Like it's been around for a long time, but it sometimes it peaks in popularity and then it might cool down a little bit and then it spikes back up. So around 2008 was the first one of those peaks that I rode. Then there was another one around 2012. Don't quote me on these dates, but then recently it's just like gone through the roof. So it's crazy. So I'm looking at the chat right now, and awesome. So I'm seeing Becca saying finding ways to amplify student voice. Okay, never made a podcast, but listen to many podcasts. And if y'all don't mind sharing the podcast that you like in the chat, that would be cool as well. So Janetta is saying brand new, wants to learn what podcasting is. All right. Anne is looking to learn the beginnings of podcasting. Becca's saying starting year 35 and still remember day one. Me too. Yes. Kay is saying no experience in podcasting, but interested in learning. Oh, and thank you so much for the kind words, Kay. And Anna is saying no experience in using podcasts with students yet, would like to learn. All right. Very cool. Very, very cool. So welcome to each of you. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So thinking about why podcasting, and you'll see here, the screenshot of a very popular podcast, Serial. Like when you say the word podcasting, then for a lot of people, Serial's what comes to mind because it was a lot of people's gateway into podcasting. It's so compelling. They tell a story that kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat. Oh, and I see that Naya is talking about favorite podcast. So Leading Equity, Sheldon Akins. Oh my gosh. Yes, Dr. Akins is so dope. So love him. So a lot of people have heard of Serial. That might have been your entryway into podcasts, but why podcast? And thinking about it with an educational lens, why might we podcast? Well, I know that for some people, podcasting is a way to kind of get ideas, right? Like I listen to a lot of educational podcasts because I want to get ideas. I want to step up my game. But also as a podcaster, I realize that people that I interview and I can ask them the questions that are on my mind and they answer those questions based on their experience and their expertise. And I'm learning from every podcast guest that I interview. In addition, some people do it as an instructional tool. So they may use it. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the term flipped classroom. I do a session teaching and learning through video, which talks a little bit more about the flipped classroom. But basically, that's like preloading the content that students listen to before they come to class. And then when you have them with you face-to-face or, virtually face-to-face, as the case may be, then they'll already know the concept, the lecture part. So you can do that through videos, but you could also do that through podcasting. And another thing that I like is, let me actually go to this slide. So you can use it as a tool to connect with your PLN, your personal learning network. There's a session I do teaching. No, I told you about that one. Sorry. CPR. Let's talk about PLN is what it's called on the session board, but talking about personalized learning network. So there's one that I do with my PLN, with my personalized learning network, and just pretty much to build community and to learn and grow from one another and with one another. So crowdsource topics, crowdsource guests. So that's one that I do. So I'm looking at Becca's comments. Oh, I see Cult of Pedagogy. Yes. Shout out to Jennifer Gonzalez. Love her. She is amazing. Okay. So you might be asking yourself, okay, how do I begin to get started? So once you know your why, like why are you podcasting? So think about it. I'm actually going to ask y'all this in the chat. What would be your why behind your podcast? Would you be looking to do a podcast as an instructional tool? Would you be looking to do it as a way to connect with your PLN and generate content? What is your why? Okay, and I see Becca saying, I flipped my class using video and super interested in using podcasts. Yes. Becca is also saying podcast instruction, but also for kids. And Anna's saying as an instructional tool. All right, fantastic. So these are all great ideas, and we can definitely use podcasting for these things. And the sky's the limit as far as why you might want to use podcasting. So pretty much, just to recap, a podcast is a recorded audio, sometimes video. You could think of it as a show, right? Think of it as a radio show on the go. You can listen to it whenever you want. So that, in essence, is what a podcast is. So you can jam pack it with your learning information. You can jam pack it with interviews from guests, whatever you want to do. There is no right or wrong reason to do a podcast, but it has served me well, both as an instructional tool with my middle school students. So having them create their own podcasts, I've loved doing that. I've loved making a podcast for my master's level students. So we called it the ET 630 breakdown, and it just kind of broke down whatever we did that week in a small bite. So that was another reason that we use podcasts. And the third podcast I do is EduMatch, which is just pretty much a question that people have. And we just, crowdsource a panel. People come together, they share their ideas on the topic, and, sharing is caring. So by the end, we have like this whole pool of research. And one more that I forgot to mention, we do one through my district also called One-to-One with One-on-One. No, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. One-on-One with one-to-one. So it started for the one-to-one schools in my district, but now it's kind of like, my whole district's about to go one-to-one. So it's for everybody in my district, and just kind of sharing best practices and highlighting schools that are doing some really good things that everyone can learn from. Oh, thank you so much. Yes, thank you for dropping that link. So Sheldon Akins, Leading Equity, highly recommended. And yes, Microsoft, oh my goodness, the closed captioning is phenomenal. All right, so you want a podcast. So let's talk about that. The very first thing that, oh, and Becca, you're saying that my example sounds like an unconference. Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of sort of is. We actually pair it with the Twitter chat. So it's like a video panel, and at the same time, people are answering the questions, and there's like a Twitter chat that's going out at the same time. So we're getting like tons of crowdsourced answers. So it's really, really cool. All right, so let's talk about the gear. Okay, so the gear is what to start with. So why is it important to have good hardware and software? And in essence, I mean, it's very simple, just to sound good, you know, like I can think of some podcasts where people have some phenomenal top of the line gear, sounds perfect, right? And I can think of examples on the other end of the spectrum where the gear, you know, is not very good, or the sound quality is not very good, and that is, you know, not very pleasing to listen to. But I have good news though. You don't need to have expensive equipment to get started. A lot of times you can work with what you already have. Like if you have you know, like a pair of headphones and a microphone, or even a combo of the two, and you don't have to go out and buy anything super expensive. You can if you want, but you don't have to. But I would say that the most important thing is to make sure that you have some headphones, right? Because when you have headphones and a microphone, then what it does is that it will capture your voice. You can't see my microphone because it's like off camera. And I'm surprised you can't hear the birds today, because I have some birds outside my window that are very, very loud. But this is a very sensitive microphone. But yeah, your microphone will capture your voice. So a lot of times computers have built-in microphones. Depending on what you're trying to do, you just need to know your audience. If you're doing it for your students, I'm telling you right now, students are so forgiving when it comes to this kind of stuff. So a built-in microphone might be all you need. But I highly recommend that if it's going to be more than just you talking to the camera, or to, you know, your audio software, that you get some headphones, because that way when your guest answers or what have you, then you won't be getting all kinds of feedback. The feedback is incredibly off-putting. So you want to try to minimize that by getting you a headset and or a microphone. Okay. And I see, oh, thank you so much for dropping that about Michael Matera. Well played. Yes, that is such a great podcast. And please keep the recommendations coming. So yeah, he does a phenomenal job about gamifying the classroom. Love, love, love him. Okay. Another option that you have, and once again, like I said, podcasts are usually audio, but sometimes they're video as well. So a webcam sometimes is helpful. Now, for me, the webcam that I use is typically the one that comes with my computer. So that's really all I need. But some people like to get fancy with it. Sometimes I like to get fancy with it. I have like my camera over here that sometimes if I want to get super fancy, then I'll connect this to my computer and record myself through here. It gives it like a grainier look. But that's not something that you necessarily have to do. That's just an option. It's based on your preference, based on what you're trying to accomplish. Once again, know your audience. Like, you know, there's no need to go overkill, you know, if it's something that's going to remain relatively in-house. Really, the most important thing that you want is to be clearly heard. That is your main goal of the podcast. So what I would recommend is that you try different things. Like first, try it with just your computer, you know, your computer mic, and a pair of headphones. See if that gives you a sound that you like. And then if you want to up the ante, if you want to go ahead and splurge at some point, then there are some great, great microphones out there. So I'm kind of partial to a specific brand called Blue, but I mean, like that's just me. You can try whatever you like. I remember somebody popped in for office hours last week and we were talking about different microphones. So if you look on Amazon, look at the ratings, one thing that you do want to be aware of though, is if you're buying a microphone for a podcast, and you probably want to make sure it's a USB mic. I'm not sure, everyone's computer setup is different. So definitely check out the specifications of your own computer. But for most computers, a USB microphone would work. I do a lot of music and audio stuff that uses traditional equipment, or that used to use more traditional equipment with, like the phone plug jack. So some computers do take that, some don't. So USB typically would do everything that you need. Okay. So that's the first part, talking about the gear. Now, the next thing, think about what your podcast is going to be on, right? And that's actually the very first step. Why are you doing your podcast? So that goes back to at the beginning when I asked you to define your why, like why are you about to do this podcast? What is your reason behind it? So my dad always says, plan your work, work your plan. That he forgets that he ever said that, but it is so true. So to have a plan about what kind of guests do I want? What kind of topics do I want? If I'm doing this for an instructional purpose, then it might be helpful for me to have like maybe my curriculum with me, and I can look and see, okay, where would this tie into? How often am I going to do this? Is this going to be like a weekly thing, a monthly thing? Is this going to be to kick off the theme? So just having those ideas in your mind. Or if you're doing it with your PLN, for example, for me, I would do mine weekly, but now I've kind of taken changed the format up, and I've broken it into seasons. So that gives me a little bit of a break. So when life gets in the way, not every Sunday evening at 6 Eastern, is feasible. So I kind of break it up into seasons, but thinking about that, right? And thinking about your guests. So why is it important to have a variety of guests? Well, what you want to do when you're coming up with a list of potential guests for your show, and this is just my recommendation. This is not the be all end all, but this is just my opinion. So I feel like if you're going to do a podcast that is for your PLN, then you should include your PLN in there and try to make it as representative as you can. Try to get a mix. A lot of times people look for, the big names that people will tune in and listen to, and, they already have a following. And that is all very well and good to kind of get some of those people on there if you can. And in addition, look out for people whose voices may not be heard all the time. That's one thing that I really try to keep in mind when I do my podcast. So think about also your format. Do you want to do a solo podcast, or do you want to have a panel of guests? So there's pros and cons to both. Solo podcast would be like one that you do kind of by yourself. And with that, then, obviously you don't have to worry about coordinating schedules with someone else. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But, you are just kind of sharing your opinion. And that's cool. That's cool. And you can always mix it up. You can always have a hybrid of the two. But think about that. Do you want it to be primarily coming from you, or primarily you interviewing someone else, or having a panel? And I noticed that a lot of you were talking about instructional podcasts. So maybe one thing you might want to consider is interviewing your students, or having your students be the podcast host from time to time, or maybe assigning them to, even do their own podcast. So those were a couple of ideas to throw in there. So in terms of topics, okay, one thing that I like to do is I like to crowdsource topics. Now, once again, this is for my own podcast I do with my personalized learning network. And also for the district podcast, we tend to crowdsource topics. So with this, we have a form that we put out, and we just, kind of ask whatever community, so be it our school community or be it my global learning community, what topics they want to talk about. And I do this for two reasons. We do this for two reasons, I should say. The first one is to build capacity among the PLN. And that goes back to kind of looking at who we are inviting to the table when it comes to our shows. I have been surprised on many occasions that people have reached out and said, hey, is it okay to list on my resume that I was a guest on such and such episode? And I'm just like, wow, mind blown, right? So definitely that's adding to people's you know, knowledge base, or I'm sorry, their portfolios of what they can bring to the table. So that's one thing, but also relevance. Relevance is another reason why you may want to crowdsource topics, because you know that your listening audience thinks that X, Y, or Z is important. So that might be something that you want to bring to the table. So think about creating a form and bringing that form into sharing that form with your community. Hi, Sasha. I see that Sasha just joined. I know her, so just wanted to say hello. Okay. So just kind of a recap on this. One thing is to don't just stick to who you know, be intentional. Try to get different voices, different names on there. You know, there's so many untold stories that are out there. Everybody has a story. There's how many people in the world? Over 7 billion. And everybody has their own story. Everyone has their own perspective, their own background knowledge. So it's important to go ahead and bring to invite as many different voices to the table as you can. Also, decide if you want to feature solo guests, or if you want to crowdsource a panel, or if you want to do like a one where you are mainly talking to your audience. So, and just keep in mind, you don't have to be locked in these boxes. You can always kind of switch it up, but just think about the predominant focus, what you would like to do. And if you want to crowdsource a panel, then you could easily just whip up a form and just have people sign up for different shows that they want to be on. Okay. In addition, don't feel like you have to take every single topic that people suggest. So if you do the form, and people suggest something that does not fit, this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, defining your why. Shout out to Barbara Bray. She has really taught me about this whole define your why thing. But stick to your why. So if people, like, let's say that your podcast is on elementary technology integration, and somebody proposes a topic, they want to talk about clowns. You don't have to talk about that, obviously, because it does not relate to your podcast. So even though you are kind of picking, you know, you're crowdsourcing your topics, then you don't have to pick every single one. If it's not a good fit, then feel free to disregard it. And I have to say hello to Alice. I see she just joined us as well. So hello. All right. So once again, if you have any questions on anything I said, or if you have your own experiences that you'd like to share with the group, hey, Cindy, I see Cindy just joined as well. If you have anything that you want to share, then please feel free to drop it in the chat. That would be amazing. So, all right. So with all that being said, we're going to go to the next part, which is about recording and editing. Now, why is this important? Why is it important to edit your podcast? And the short version is it may be, it may not be. But if you are trying to give your podcast like a polished quality, then editing is definitely something that you want to consider. Okay. So obviously recording, you have to record it or there would be no podcast. So that doesn't need an explanation, but editing is just to give it that little extra shine. So once again, I'm going to drive back to my point. Know your audience. When I was flipping my classroom, then at the very beginning, I used to edit, spend so much time on editing. But later I realized that, hey, you know, doing it on the fly and just getting it in one take and putting it out there, I mean, that's how it would be in the classroom anyway. So I'm not, you know, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on editing. But if you're doing it, let's say for a different, you know, for a different audience or a different purpose, and you want to put in that time to edit, then by all means do so. Yes. Okay. So I see that Becca said barbarabray.net. Yep, that is exactly who I referenced. She is great. And Cindy is saying, yes, be authentic for your students. I agree. 100%. Be authentic. So In terms of recording your podcast, then what you want to do, once again, is to plan your work your plan. So what I like to do, especially if I am doing a podcast with someone other than just myself, is that I'll come up with kind of an outline or maybe even a list of questions if it's an interview, just so that we stay on the same page. Now, some people will write out word for word what they're going to say, and they read it. And some people are great at this, and that is just a fantastic workflow for them. Find a workflow that works for you. I know if I were to do this, then I would be sounding like a robot. So that doesn't necessarily work for me. But what does work for me is to have different bullet points. You see me glancing over here, even with this presentation. I have my bullet points. I'm just like, okay, let me make sure that I cover bang, 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 bang. And then just kind of flow with it. And that's kind of how my podcasts go, especially if it's like a solo episode. But if it is an episode where I'm interviewing someone, then what I'll do is that I will write up a list of questions, and I'll put their bio in there too, because I like to let my listeners know who they're talking or who they're listening to. I like them to I like the person to be able to check to make sure everything's right, because sometimes if you pull the bio from somewhere like some old website you happen to find online, and it could be totally wrong, totally outdated. So I like to put it on there, put it on that on that document that you can share with them. And let them see if there's anything that they want to change. So you also should keep in mind the length of time of your podcast. So let the questions or the bullet points kind of correspond with that time. For my EduMatch podcast and for my district podcast, for our district podcast, for that matter, then we try to shoot for about 15 minutes. For the district podcast, then it's 15 minutes or less. For EduMatch, we always shoot for 15 minutes, and it always goes to like 45. That's that's what happens. But just to give you an idea, for EduMatch, for the panel discussions, then we'll usually have between maybe 3 and 10 people. I know Cindy's been part of one. Alice has been part of one. So we will usually have, maybe between 3 and 5 questions that we'll go through. And that usually takes us about 45 minutes, right? For the district podcast that goes 15 minutes or less, then we usually have about maybe 4 questions, and we usually only have like 1 or 2 people featured. So just kind of make your questions, plan ahead, think of how much time you're going to need, and then have your questions planned around that, okay? So let's see. So you can record on any tool. As you all know, this lovely series is being sponsored by Microsoft. There are some great Microsoft tools out there, such as Streams is a great video tool. There's Teams, which we're using right now. You could conduct an interview or do your podcast using Teams. That is definitely a possibility. There's also the possibility of Flipgrid, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But there's so many great tools that you can use, and there's a variety of other ones out there as well. Do your research and find whatever tool works the best for you. Some people like to use tools with video because, as we were saying before, you might want to have video when you record your podcast, not necessarily because the output will have video, but from what I've learned, when you have multiple people, then you can signal some nonverbal cues through video, because if you see somebody going like that, then that usually means that they're about to talk, or they have something to say, or they may put their finger up like this, and you wouldn't really know that unless you could see them. So video is something to consider that you may want to do when you're doing your podcast. Okay. Yes, Becca, the Flipgrid, the Shorts has so many options. I agree with you 100%. Flipgrid is just the bomb. Okay. So matter of fact, let's talk about that. My eyes just fell on that bullet point. So that is on this slide. So I do a course on podcasting, and one of the people who enrolled in the course posed a question to me. She lived on one side of the world, and most of her guests were on the other side of the world. So she said, how can we do that with time zones? Flipgrid is a great way to circumvent that. So you could just, you could have a grid and have different topics, like each question be a different topic. And people can just like kind of go in and respond, and you can pull all of that down and just edit it. Okay, and there's a lot of different tools you can use for editing. I believe that there's one through Microsoft, but there's several different tools you can use for editing, and just kind of pull those together, edit them, and then you could put it out there as a polished podcast. Have your intro music, your outro music. And yeah, there's so many great features with Flipgrid. Oh my gosh, I don't know if y'all saw Flipgrid live, but I was geeking out. That was a little earlier this week. So I'm excited to see how those might affect the podcasting. The mixtape, I love that. And yes, Cindy, it's great to have that additional interaction. Absolutely. And EdCamp used Flipgrid as a PD conference this year. It was awesome. Oh my gosh, I wish I could have seen that. Yeah, but Flipgrid is really dope, and there's some great sessions on Flipgrid that people are doing. So just check the schedule. If you're not familiar with that tool, then I would say that might be something you want to check out, and it does have some useful implications for podcasting as well. So definitely check that out. And yeah, all right. So once you have everything recorded, oh, wait, I'm sorry. I see that Naya said use mixtapes to create a retirement message for one of our staff members since we couldn't come together in person. Oh, that is so, yes, that is so sweet. I love how people are just like, the connections just give me all the warm fuzzies. And Sasha's saying, so is podcast more of a fluid word? It is not audio only. Can it be video? It can be video, absolutely. So with podcasts, then traditionally they are audio only. Like if you think of a radio show, for example, I like to put on the radio, listen to NPR, right? So that show, a lot of times they take it and they make it into a podcast version that people can just like kind of listen to on the go. So they're on demand, right? So personal on demand. So podcast. So the first three letters stand for personal on demand. So you can think of them as radio shows. But sometimes there are video podcasts where people actually, do a video. So you can those I don't see as much of, but they do exist. But yeah, so podcasts they're great for so many things. For our own learning as educators, there's podcasts for that. There's podcasts that we can make for our students. There's podcasts that our students can make for each other. So many great reasons to use podcasting. Okay, absolutely. So great questions. Oh yeah, yeah, Becca, absolutely. So stands for personal on demand. It's funny because this is when I was doing my dissertation, it evolved so many times. But at one point, then it was going to be all about podcasting, and it ended up turning into video. But and that's like a sign of the times. So just some background: I started in 2007, and you see how it, like, every year it just kind of changed based on the latest ed tech developments. So by the time I finished, it was about student created videos, but at one point it was about podcasting. Yeah, so absolutely. All right. Yes, exactly. Like taking the audio from the video. 100%. So just like thinking of a radio show on demand. Okay. All right. So, thank you, Cindy. Yes, same here. Sasha, thank you. Y'all, oh my gosh, y'all are making me cheese so hard. All right, but moving on to the next part about sharing. So you've done all of this great work. You have this podcast recorded. You have it edited if you choose to. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is that there's a site called Fiverr. Where you can, it's Fiverr, and then from there, that's where I tend to get my jingles made for my podcast. So you can get people to do stuff, to create jingles and logos and whatever you need for your podcasting needs, starting at like $6 and up. So it's a pretty good resource. You can just kind of scroll through, look at their different ratings and stuff like that, and see who you can find. But yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm seeing Naya saying supported a student this year whose teacher uses serial podcasts to develop arguments in English. Yes. Love this. And they had graphic organizers. That is so, so cool. Yeah, there's so many great educational resources or educational uses of podcasts, whether it's listening to already created ones or creating our own. And with our students, giving them the opportunity to create something, a lot of times that's what really helps the learning stick for them. So absolutely. Okay. So once you have produced a podcast, you've recorded and maybe edited it, and you may have put some music, some intro and outro music, or maybe not. Like I have a friend, Dr. Will D'Amport, who does the I Am Dr. Will show. He does not do music, and it totally works for him. So again, this is like Burger King, have it your way. So whatever works for you, find your style and just roll with it. But sharing would be the next step. So nobody knows about your podcast, about your great work unless you share it. So a friend of mine, Scott in California, some of you in California may know Scott, but he was saying to you can discover your audience and adapt content based upon their needs and desires while maintaining your voice. And I love that part. I cannot echo that enough. Maintain your voice. Remember your why. Why are you doing this podcast? Stick to the reason why you're doing the podcast. Everybody's going to have an opinion, but just, stand firm and just stay open to learning, right? So thinking about promoting your podcast. So this part may be relevant to you. It may not be as relevant if it's something that you are creating solely for your students and solely for the classroom, but you do need to share it with your students regardless. So let me first actually backtrack and talk about that before I talk about getting it out to like the PLN or to the world. So with students, then a great way to share is if you're already using like some kind of LMS or something like that, then that might be a great way to get it to your students. In addition, if you have like some kind of website or something, then you can always embed it in there. And depending on what level you teach, I know that earlier Yashi was talking about teaches college. So what I did for my college students is that, I just put it out there. I put it out there the same way that I would put it out there like to the world, because I wanted everybody, if they wanted to listen to it, to be able to access it. And I just told my students to subscribe. But if you're teaching in K-12, you probably want to get it to them more directly. So however you generally disseminate electronic information, then that would be a great way to do it. Okay. Now, if you are doing it in, if you're doing the audience like kind of as the world, or other educators, no matter where they are, then you can definitely, going back to creating the logo. The logo is very, very, very important. So you could create the logo yourself. There's many tools that you could use. You could use Microsoft Paint, or you could, have it crowdsourced for you through a resource like Fiverr or something. There's so many out there. But there's also some places where you can get like stock images and just kind of layer text over them, such as Pixabay and Pexels and stuff like that. But create your logo. Okay. Also, another thing that you want to think about is show notes. Okay. So show notes, if you are an avid listener of podcasts, then you probably see that there is a written description next to these different episodes, so that you can kind of preview it, see if it's something that you want to listen to by just looking at the show notes. Show notes are very important. I am horrible at creating show notes myself. I am so lazy when it comes to show notes, but they are super important. And they're even more important because people can easily do like a search and find and see if there's something that they want to see about your podcast. Now, I want to say that there may also be something with SEO for those of you who are very, very web oriented. So you might be able to, in the SEO settings, when people do a search online, then your podcast may show up in hits if you have good show notes, and you have what they happen to be looking for in your show notes. So show notes are very, very important. Whenever you get your podcast listed through any directory that you may use, there's lots of different ways to listen to podcasts, like on Spotify and on iTunes and all of these different platforms, right? So you would just go to the platform that you would want to get it listed on. You would add your podcast there by following the directions. And then each time you upload a podcast, then you would need to upload show notes as well. So with your show notes, you want them to be as descriptive as possible without driving yourself crazy. So definitely what you would want to include is just a brief summary of what the show is about, as well as the contact information of any guests that you have on your podcast. Okay. All right. And once you have your podcast out there and listed, then you want to share about it. So you might want to tweet about it or include it on other social media. So wherever you may have a social media presence, then that would be a great way to share your podcast. Now, one hashtag that I want to make you aware of is Podcastedu. If you are a Twitter user, then if you look up Podcastedu, then you'll be able to see so many different podcasts and new episodes that are being tweeted out about things on education. So definitely check out that resource, Podcastedu. Okay. And I see Becca's comment, backwards planning, write your show notes first. You can definitely do that. That is a workflow that may work for you. You know, like I said before, there's some of my friends that I know will like write a blog post first, and they'll even put like the whole content, like that whole transcription in their show notes, which I think is so dope. But you can do that, and you can go through and just kind of cover that or use that as a guide for what you're going to talk about on your show. Me, what I usually do is I'll do the episode and I'll write the show notes after, because sometimes things may come up that you didn't necessarily plan on. And I mean, technically you could just go back and edit your show notes afterwards, but I just kind of, like to do it all at once. So yeah, but Podcastedu is a great space to leave it on. And let's not forget that when you are doing your podcast, when you are actually recording your podcast, then it's a good thing to give your listeners a call to action. They are part of your community. When they're listening to your podcast, they are part of your community. So you can ask them what you want them to do. You may want to ask them to leave a rating on wherever they're listening, and or to share it with their PLN. So that is a great way to get more people knowing about your podcast, through that word of mouth, through that social proof. And conversely, when you're listening to podcasts, like when I listen to podcasts, and I like to tweet about what I'm listening to, because for a couple different reasons, but one, I like to amplify the good work that that I see my peers doing, and two, for those people who I might be connected to, then sometimes it helps them, and they're just like, oh, I see this show is something that I'm interested in, this topic, so let me listen to that as well. So I think that's a great thing to share, not only your own content, but also when you are listening to other podcasters, spread that love, and things that resonate with you, then you may want to spread that love. And it has not been uncommon that sometimes as podcasters, you may do a cross interview. And I have some friends, I've had them on my show, they've had me on their show, and vice versa. So that is yet another way to grow your audience. So we are better together. That's a hashtag that's on Twitter, hashtag better together. But yes, absolutely. All right, cool. So we are actually getting towards the finish line a lot sooner than I thought. So we're going to have some time at the end for some Q&A. But lastly, the very last thing that I wanted to share with you all is about repurposing. So a good friend of mine, Joanne Sweeney Burke, she is a content marketer over in Ireland. And she has a great show, JSB Talks Digital. And on her show, one time I was listening to an episode where she was talking about get the most bang for your buck from this content that you're creating. So I thought about it and I was just like, wait a minute, that makes total sense. So when you are creating this podcast, then it doesn't just have to stop there. There's so much more that you can do with it. You can get the most bang for your buck. So one way that you can repurpose, let's say that you are doing a video podcast, right? And you do have your camera on, then you can always take that same video from the podcast, either edited or in its raw form, and you can put that somewhere else online, like on a video site, okay? And that is yet another way to reach a whole different audience. You know, I've recorded some videos and put them on my Facebook page, put them on so many other social networks, like LinkedIn, whatever, and the video is there, you know. So so that's one thing that you can do. You can also, and this one I love it, and this is kind of like a backwards hack to what I was telling you some of my friends were doing. I was telling you about how some of my friends would write a blog post and then they would read it as a podcast, and that's definitely one way that you can do it. But another way that you can do it in reverse. And there are websites out there. You see right now as I'm talking, this is being transcribed, right? Now it's being transcribed on the fly, but there are some sites out there like Rev or Temi, and what you can do is have them, you can pay and have your words transcribed, and you can just like take that transcription and put it up as a blog post, right? Right now, you don't just have a podcast, you have a podcast, you have a video, and you have a blog, all from the same content, all in one. You didn't have to do this thing 3 times. You did it one time and you get 3 for the price of 1. So Patty is asking, what did I use to get subtitles? This is through Microsoft PowerPoint. So they have like this accessibility feature where it will do the transcription. I see that Janetta is saying it's available on Teams and Zoom. Yep, absolutely. Okay. But yeah, I'm doing this one through the PowerPoint presentation itself. It's transcribing as I'm going. Okay. So yeah, so speaking of those captions, yes, you can definitely get those captions laid out for you like a transcription. Rev.com is one. I mean, you have to pay for it, but it'll, you know, they have like a live human transcribing it, and you could just take that, put it on your blog, and it is right there. And I love what Alice said. Stream also has automatic caption transcription, 100%. And thank you so much. Thank you. Absolutely. So you can also, here's another idea. So I told you a little bit about EduMatch. And when we do ours, another way that we repurpose the content is in that actually in the production itself. So as people are on this video panel, that I then will take that audio and put it out as a podcast, right? So we have that audio from the podcast, we have that video panel, and we also have a Twitter chat where people are answering questions on Twitter, the same questions that they are answering on this video panel, then they are answering them on Twitter. And that is yet another way to repurpose the content, excuse me. So instead of having to do 4 or 5 different things, then you could just all at once, bam, and have it right there for you. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Nia. If you're using PowerPoint, you can also get Presentation Translator to create captions. And you can, Becca saying, you can search for the caption transcription for terms. Great if you're looking for something in a recording. And Nia saying the neat thing is that it'll do this in 66 different languages. Wow. That is so awesome. Man, I'm so glad that y'all are here. Like I'm learning from you all. So thank you so much for sharing that. And please continue dropping that knowledge, because there's just so much I'm picking up. All right, so just a few things to leave you with. One is to be an avid listener to podcasts. So the way that I've gotten better, and I'm still learning, I still have a lot of room to grow. But over the years, I've gotten better by listening to other people's podcasts and saying, "Ooh, I like that. I like that." And I like that. Let me start doing these things. And I mean, sharing is caring, you know, so learning from one another. Sometimes you'll just get it from the listening. Sometimes podcasts may be on the subject of podcasting. I know that Dr. Will and Jen Gonzalez have had some podcasts about how to do podcasts. You know, just leveling up in those ways. So learning by modeling, learning by explicit you know, instructions, seeking out those resources, those are really good things. And also sharing to the community, supporting one another. I can't underscore this enough. Like, that community support is everything. And building a relationship, you know, when people reach out to you, well, actually, let me backtrack. Reaching out to people and letting them know that you appreciate their work, and building that listener slash content creator relationship with them is so key, so clutch. And then when it becomes like a peer-to-peer relationship, you know, you've already laid that foundation. And these same people, you know, once you have that relationship, then you can ask them questions on your journey. Like, even if they may be a little ahead of you, then they might pick up some things from your show. So just building that friendship, building that camaraderie. You know, this is not a zero-sum game, and we're all here. We can learn from one another. We can share. A lot of times I find out about other podcasts from like guest episodes I listen to on other podcasts. So really good stuff there. And that is mainly what I have for you today. So if you are a Twitter person, then please connect with me. I would love to connect with you. And yeah, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up because we have about 9 minutes. Thank you so much, Becca. Appreciate it. We have about 9 minutes for any Q&A. So I'm going to hang out. If you're all good and you got what you needed, then I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. Let me stop sharing my screen. But yeah, I want to say thank you so much for coming. And if you have some lingering questions and you want to just hang out, then I will be here. But I really appreciate you all. So thank you so much for coming. Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you. I'm seeing the chat. So thank you, Alice. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Crystal. Much appreciated. I'm going to pause the recording, or stop the recording, actually. Okay. Thank you so much, Anne.